You ever have that one boss who makes you question your entire life? Yeah, that was me. I was 28 when I landed the job. At the time, it felt like a huge win. The company was well known in our city, one of those places people said you were lucky to get into. Good salary, benefits, potential for growth. I had worked crap jobs for years, bouncing between contract gigs and retail management, so when this offer came through, I thought, finally. Finally, stability. Finally, a chance to prove myself. I still remember my first day like it was yesterday. I walked into that office buzzing with nerves and excitement. You know that feeling when you've ironed your shirt 3 times, shined your shoes, rehearsed your introduction in your head? That was me. I wanted to make a good impression. I wanted this job to be my fresh start. And then I met him. My boss. Let's call him Dan. Dan was one of those people who, the second you meet them, something in your gut twists. He had this fake smile plastered on his face, but his eyes were dead. Cold. Calculating. The kind of eyes that sized you up like you were a piece of meat, not a person. He shook my hand, looked me up and down, and the first thing he said was, "So, you're the new kid? Hope you don't slow us down. Not welcome aboard. Not glad to have you." No. Just a thinly veiled insult. I laughed it off, nervous chuckle, you know. Tried to brush it aside. I figured maybe it was just his sense of humor. Some people joke like that. Right? Wrong. That first week was a blur of onboarding, paperwork, learning systems, meeting coworkers. Most of them were nice enough, polite, busy, cautious. But I noticed something quickly. Whenever Dan walked into a room, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations stopped. People straightened in their chairs. Smiles faded. It was like a cold draft sweeping through. And it didn't take me long to find out why. My first big team meeting was on day 3. The agenda was simple: project updates, roles, timelines. I was still figuring out how the workflow operated, so I kept my notes close, ready to speak when asked. Dan sat at the head of the table, leaning back in his chair with this smug grin like he owned the world. He went around the table, firing questions at everyone. People answered fast, clipped, like soldiers reporting to a general. Then it was my turn. "So, new kid, tell us what you bring to the table." Everyone's eyes were on me. I took a breath, tried to stay calm. I said something about my previous experience managing retail operations, handling logistics, training staff. Stuff that was relevant to the position. He let me finish, then leaned forward and smirked. "Cute. So basically you stocked shelves and told people when to take breaks." The room went dead silent. My stomach dropped. A couple people exchanged glances but kept their heads down. Nobody spoke up. I forced a smile, my cheeks burning. "I actually handled a lot more than that." He cut me off. "Relax, new kid. Well, see if you can keep up. Don't take it personally." But it was personal. It was absolutely personal. That was the first time he humiliated me in front of everyone. And it wouldn't be the last. The weeks rolled on, and Dan seemed to take special joy in making me look like an idiot. If I submitted work, he'd pick it apart in front of the whole team. If I spoke up in a meeting, he'd roll his eyes and mock my ideas. "Wow, groundbreaking insight there, John. Did you pull that from a fortune cookie? Listen to the new guy, he thinks he's reinventing the wheel." It didn't matter if my point was solid. It didn't matter if my work was good. If it came from me, it was his cue to perform. And that's exactly what it was, a performance. I started to realize he thrived on having an audience. He didn't just criticize behind closed doors, he needed witnesses. He needed to establish dominance, to put me in my place where everyone could see. I noticed something else too. I was the only target. He'd do it to others as well, though never quite as much. He had his favorites, people he praised just enough to keep them loyal, and people he mocked enough to keep them scared. It was like he was playing some sick game of chess, moving pieces around, making sure nobody felt safe enough to challenge him. But me? I was his favorite punching bag. Looking back, I think that was the point. I was new, fresh blood. He wanted to break me and to show everyone that no matter who you were or what you achieved before, once you stepped into his office, you belonged to him. There was this one moment, God, I'll never forget it. We were in a client meeting, big account, high stakes. I had done all the prep work, research, slides, notes. Dan strutted in late, coffee in hand, acting like he owned the place. When it came time to present, he handed me the floor. My heart raced, but I nailed it. I knew I nailed it. The clients were nodding, asking good questions, impressed by the data. And then Dan laughed. Loud, mocking. Sorry, folks, you'll have to forgive the rookie. He gets excited when people pretend to care about his spreadsheets. The room chuckled awkwardly. My face burned. I stumbled through the rest of the presentation, all the confidence sucked out of me. When we left, he slapped me on the back and whispered, Lesson 1, never outshine the boss. That was his game. Humiliate, belittle, control. And if you push back, head double down. At first, I told myself I could handle it. I needed the job. Rent was going to pay itself, and finding work hadn't been easy. So I swallowed it. Laughed off the jokes. Smiled through the sting. But slowly, it wore me down. I stopped speaking up in meetings. Stopped sharing ideas. Why bother when I knew they'd be ridiculed? It'd sit at my desk, shoulders tight, waiting for the next jab. Worse, it followed me home. It'd lie in bed at night, replaying his words over and over. Stocking shelves. Fortune cookie. Don't outshine the boss. It echoed in my head until I started to believe it. Maybe I was useless. Maybe I was just a rookie who didn't belong. I remember one night sitting in my car after work, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I didn't want to go home. Didn't want to walk through the door and pretend to be okay. My girlfriend asked me what was wrong, but I couldn't even put it into words. How do you explain that someone is slowly draining you piece by piece with nothing but words and smirks? Still something inside me simmered. Anger, buried under all the humiliation. Every time Dan mocked me, every time he made me feel small, a tiny spark flickered. I didn't know it then, but those sparks would eventually ignite into something much bigger. Because here's the truth, you can only push someone so far before they push back. And Dan was about to learn that the hard way. But at this point in the story act I was there yet. I was still the beaten down employee, the rookie everyone pitied but nobody defended. The storm was brewing though. And when it broke, it would change everything. You ever feel your blood boil so hot you swear people can hear it? That's where I was headed. But let me back up, because you need the full picture. By the time I hit 6 months at the company, I'd gotten used to waking up with a pit in my stomach. I wasn't excited about work anymore. I was dreading it. Every morning, I'd sit at the kitchen table, staring at my coffee, psyching myself up. Just get through today. Keep your head down. Don't give him a reason. That was my mantra. Survive the day. Survive Dan. But it didn't matter how low I kept my profile, how careful I was. Dan always found a way. He had radar for weakness. Like some twisted predator, he sniffed out fear, and he loved poking at it. Meetings were the worst. They became his stage. He'd sit there, scribbling notes, avoiding eye contact, and inevitably head pounce. John, tell us why your numbers are lagging. They're not, I save it. Well, circle back when you figure out how to do basic math. Cue the awkward chuckles, cue my silent rage. It wasn't even about my work anymore. Half the time, he didn't even check my reports before mocking them. It was just routine. I was his entertainment. And the others? They didn't dare step in. Not because they didn't see it. They saw. They all saw. But they were too scared. Dan had made examples out of people before, chew them up, spit them out, make sure nobody else tried to play hero. So I became the designated scapegoat. And God, it ate at me. The breaking point didn't come in some closed meeting. No, Dan made sure it happened in the most humiliating way possible, in public, at a client dinner. It was a Thursday night. Big-name clients flew in, and the company was trying to lock down a multi-million-dollar deal. The kind of deal that made or broke reputations. Dan strutted in wearing this stupid designer suit, loud tie, hair slicked back like a villain from a bad movie. He loved playing the big shot. Me? I was just grateful for a free meal, though my stomach was already in knots. We sat at this long table in a fancy steakhouse. Clients on one side, our team on the other. Everyone was on their best behavior. Wine glasses clinked, small talk flowed. For a moment I thought maybe, just maybe, Dan would let me off the hook. But of course not. Halfway through, one of the clients asked me about a specific datasty he'd compiled. I straightened up, relieved. Finally, something in my wheelhouse. I explained the numbers, showed how they projected into future growth, highlighted risks. I knew my stuff. The client nodded, impressed. That's excellent work. Very clear. Very thorough. My chest swelled. Validation. Recognition. For once, someone saw me. And then Dan leaned back, chuckled, and said, "Don't be too impressed. John just reads whatever I feed him. He's basically a trained parrot." The table burst into laughter. Laughter. I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. My ears burned. The client tried to hide his smile behind his wine glass, but it was too late. The damage was done. My credibility? Shattered. My pride? Torn to pieces. Dan slapped me on the back like we were buddies. "Calm down, pal. You know I'm kidding." But he was. He loved it. Loved watching me shrink in my seat, loved being the one to drag me down just when I was finally standing tall. That night I drove home in silence, fists gripping the wheel, headlights blurring through my tears. My girlfriend asked how the dinner went. I just muttered, "Fine," and went to bed. But inside, something cracked. The very next morning, he pushed me too far. I came in early, trying to shake off the humiliation from the night before. Coffee in hand, I sat at my desk, determined to focus. Dan waltzed in late, of course. He dropped his briefcase, stretched, and spotted me. A grin spread across his face. "Well, if it isn't the parrot," he said loud enough for the whole floor to hear. Snickers rippled through the office. I clenched my jaw, tried to let it roll off. But he didn't stop. "Do us a trick, John. Say something smart, make the clients clap again." My hands shook. I could feel everyone's eyes darting between us, waiting to see how he'd react. And then, like he couldn't help himself, he leaned closer and whispered, "You'll never be more than my punchline. Remember that." That was it. That was the moment. Something inside me snapped clean in half. I didn't yell. I didn't throw my coffee in his smug face, though God knows I wanted to. I just sat back, smiled, and said, "Sure thing, boss." And inside, I made a silent promise. "You want to play games? Fine. But I was going to keep being the clown for his circus." No. From that day on, I was done playing defense. I was going to take everything head thrown at me, every humiliation, every snide remark, every fake laugh, and I was going to turn it into a weapon. Because here's the thing about people like Dan, they think they're untouchable. They think HU will look the other way. They think the company needs them too much to hold them accountable. And maybe, for a while, they're right. But arrogance blinds you. And while he was too busy performing, too busy tearing me down for laughs, he didn't notice he'd stopped being scared. He'd started taking notes. Literal notes. Dates, times, comments, witnesses. I had a growing file, hidden away, with every insult and every unprofessional outburst. At first, it was just to keep myself sane, a way to vent. But now, it had a purpose. Because I knew one day, the right moment would come. And when it did, Dan would find out what happens when the parrot finally decides to bite. The funny thing is, I didn't start out thinking, "Oh, I'm going to take him down." At first, writing down what Dan said was just therapy. A notebook hidden in the bottom drawer, scrawled with things like, March 5th, 10:32 a.m. Called me dead weight in front of the sales team. March 14th, 2:10 p.m. Said I should apply for clown school since I like embarrassing myself. It was ugly, but it helped. Seeing the words written down gave me proof not just that he was toxic, but that I wasn't imagining it. But after that client dinner, after the parrot became my new nickname, those notes felt like ammunition. Every page filled wasn't just therapy anymore, it was evidence. And God help me, I started enjoying it. Every time he slipped up, every nasty quip, I wrote it down like I was building a case file. Because that's exactly what I was doing. Turns out I was the only one. One afternoon, I was in the break room making coffee, and I overheard two coworkers whispering near the fridge. Can you believe he said that to her? I know, it's insane. If she files a complaint, I'll back her up. They froze when they saw me, but I just smiled and said, don't worry. I get it. Trust me. That broke the dam. At first, it was small, a coworker sliding up to me at lunch and muttering, he humiliated me in front of the client last month. Another whispering, he told me my maternity leave made me less committed. Each story was another puzzle piece, another shard of proof that Dan was just tough, he was abusive. And they all had one thing in common, nobody wanted to go to HU alone. They were scared. And honestly, I was too. But that's when it clicked. If I could collect enough stories, if I could get enough people to admit what had done, we wouldn't be alone anymore. Strength in numbers. So I tested the waters. I scheduled a confidential chat with HU. Just me and Linda, the HU rep. I sat across from her, sweaty palms on my knees, and laid it out, the insults, the sabotage, the humiliation. I even pulled out my notebook. She skimmed it, sighed, and said the line every corporate victim hates to hear: Dan has a strong leadership style. Sometimes it can come off as abrasive. I nearly laughed in her face. Abrasive? He was sandpaper on bare skin. I pushed back. He's not abrasive. He's abusive. And I'm not the only one. Her eyes flickered just for a second. Interest. Fear. Maybe both. She leaned forward. If others are experiencing the same behavior, encourage them to come forward. It's difficult for us to act on one complaint without corroboration. Translation: bring us more blood before we sharpen the knives. Fine. Challenge accepted. From that day, I went full spy mode. Every email from Dan, saved. Screenshots, backed up on a personal drive. Every meeting in Seoul, jotted down with date, time, witnesses. Every coworker story, recorded with their permission or written out in my notes with their signatures. It became a routine. He'd humiliate me at 10 a.m. I'd log it at 10:05. He'd buck at someone else in the afternoon. I'd check in with them after work, want to add that to the file. And slowly, the file grew. At first, people were hesitant. But once they saw I was dead serious, once they realized I was backing down, they started volunteering. One by one, they came to me. A manager he screamed at in a meeting. A junior employee he reduced to tears. Even a senior director he mocked for having an accent. Dan was just cruel. He was reckless. And now he was leaving a trail of victims ready to testify. The turning point came during a late-night work session. I was staying late to prep for a presentation when Rachel, one of the project managers, stopped by my desk. "You're still here?" she asked. "Yeah." Dan suggested my last draft looked like a child drew it, so I figured he'd give it another shot. She rolled her eyes. "He's unbelievable." I hesitated, then said, "I'm documenting everything. Him. The insults. The harassment. All of it. And I'm going to HU. But I can't do it alone." Her face went still. Then she whispered, "You're not alone. I've been writing stuff down too." I stared at her, stunned. "Wait, really?" She nodded. "I didn't know if anyone else was brave enough to fight back. But if you're serious, I'm in." And just like that, I had my first real ally. Not just a whispered complaint, not just gossip in the break room. Someone actively keeping records, someone ready to stand beside me. That night, we compared notes. And holy hell, the overlap was staggering. Same dates, same insults, same meetings. It was just he said, she said anymore. It was a pattern. Documented, undeniable. We shook hands before leaving. No words, just a silent pact. We were going to take him down. Funny thing about Dan, he didn't even notice the shift. While I was building a case brick by brick, he just kept pouring gasoline on his own career. One Friday, he walked past my desk and sneered, "Working hard or hardly working, Johnny boy?" "Oh wait, I forgot. You don't know how to do either." I smile. Wrote it down. Date, time, witnesses. Another day, he mocked Rachel in a meeting for needing hand-holding on a project. She calmly pulled out her notebook, jotted it down, and met my eyes with a knowing look. We weren't victims anymore. We were record keepers. And Dan was writing his own obituary with every smug remark. 2 months after my first HU visit, I went back. This time, I wasn't empty-handed. I walked in with Rachel. We laid down binders. Actual binders. Emails, transcripts, notes, signed statements from half a dozen employees. Linda's eyes widened. This is substantial," she said, flipping through the pages. "Substantial?" I said. "It's a damn encyclopedia of abuse. You asked for corroboration. There it is." Rachel leaned forward. "We're not asking you to make him nicer. We're asking you to protect employees from a toxic boss who's actively harming this company." For the first time, HU didn't brush it off. They took notes. They asked follow-up questions. They promised an investigation. Of course, we knew what that meant, a slow, cautious cover-your-ass process. But the look on Linda's face told me we'd crossed a line. They cowed and ignored it anymore. But I was stopping there. Because here's the thing about companies, HU isn't there to protect you. They're there to protect the company. And if HU thought sweeping this under the rug would save them from a lawsuit, they'd bury it in a heartbeat. So I called a lawyer. Not some billboard ambulance chaser. A legit employment lawyer. I laid it all out, the humiliation, the retaliation, the binders of evidence. He listened, then leaned back in his chair. "If half of what you're saying is true, you don't just have a complaint. You have a case. A strong one." Hearing that, God, it was vindication like nothing else. We talked strategy. He told me to keep documenting, to save everything, to stay professional. No outbursts, no emotional emails, no slip-ups. Keep my nose clean, keep my head down, and let Dan keep digging his own grave. And that's exactly what I did. It was surreal, honestly. Knowing what I knew, holding what I held, while Dan strutted around like king of the office. He mocked me, mocked others, humiliated people in meetings, and I just smiled. Because every insult, every sneer, every parrot joke wasn't cutting me down anymore. It was another nail in his coffin. Rachel noticed too. One day after a meeting, she whispered, "You don't even flinch anymore." "Nope," I said. "Why would I? Dead men walking don't scare me." She grinned. And for the first time in a long time, I felt powerful. Not because he'd yelled back. Not because he'd gotten even in some petty way. But because he'd been patient. Methodical. Dan thought I was weak. He thought I was his plaything. But in reality, I was the quiet storm he never saw coming. And soon, he was about to find out what happens when the storm finally breaks. It started small. One Monday morning, Dan strolled into the office late, coffee in hand, smirk plastered on his face like always. He gathered us for the weekly team meeting, ready to tear into someone. But this time something was off. Linda from HU slipped into the room and sat in the corner, clipboard in hand. Silent. Watching. Dan clocked her, but he didn't change his act. He cracked jokes at my expense, rolled his eyes when Rachel presented her update, and barked at another guy for not being assertive enough. But this time, every word he said, Linda scribbled something down. Dan laughed it off, pretending not to notice. But I saw it. The flicker in his eyes. The first crack in the armor. 2 days later, the email hit my inbox, subject, HU interview confidential from Linda H. I knew what it meant. The investigation was officially on. When I walked into that HU conference room, Linda was there with another rep I didn't recognize, a corporate lawyer. The big guns. They started polite. We're conducting a workplace review. We want to understand your experiences under Dan's management. I didn't just tell them stories. I showed them. Emails printed out, time-stamped notes corroborating statements from half the team. Instances where Dan mocked accents. Where he humiliated people in front of clients. Where he sabotaged presentations. The lawyer leafed through it all, face unreadable. Linda took notes furiously. When I finished, the lawyer finally said, "This is thorough." I smirked. That's one word for it. Over the next week, whispers spread through the office. People were being called into HU one by one. Some came out pale, others relieved. Rachel texted me after her interview. I told them everything. They can't ignore it now. Another coworker dropped by my desk after hours. "I backed you up." All of us did. He's done. And still Dan strutted around, oblivious. He must have thought he was untouchable. That illusion shattered on Friday afternoon. It was supposed to be a team alignment meeting. Dan called it. But when we walked into the big conference room, HU was already there. Linda, the corporate lawyer, even a director from higher up. Dan frowned. "What's all this?" Linda smiled tightly. "Dan, we're here to discuss some concerns that have been raised." "Concerns?" He scoffed. "What concerns?" That's when the lawyer slid a thick folder across the table. "My folder." "Our folder." Dan flipped it open, scanned a page, and went red. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "Lies. Exaggerations. Whining from weak employees who can't handle a little pressure." Linda didn't flinch. "Dan, there are over 20 separate documented incidents corroborated by multiple employees." Dan's eyes darted around the table, looking for backup. None came. Rachel sat across from him, calm. The others avoided his gaze. Even his so-called allies stayed quiet. For the first time, he was alone. He cracked. "You're all pathetic." He exploded, slamming his fist on the table. "I've carried this team for years. Without me, you'd be nothing." "Nothing?" His voice echoed through the room. HU reps exchanged glances. The lawyer calmly clicked his pen and made a note. I just sat there, leaning back in my chair, letting him dig deeper. Finally I spoke. Quiet. Steady. "You humiliated us for years, Dan. You thought you were making us stronger. But all you did was make us hate you. And now, you've made yourself irrelevant." The silence that followed was brutal. Dan's face went purple. He sputtered, pointing at me. "You. This is you. You think you can take me down? You're a joke." Linda's voice cut him off. "Cold. Final. Anne, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the room." They actually called security. Not because Dan was violent, though God knows he looked like he wanted to be, but because protocol demanded it. 2 guards walked him out. His face was red, his eyes wild, his tie askew. He turned once at the door, glaring at me like he could burn me alive with his stare. But I just looked back at him. Calm. Silent. And for the first time in years, I had the power. Dan was suspended pending investigation. Corporate speak for he's gone, but we're covering our asses. Emails went out from higher-ups assuring staff that concerns were being taken seriously and that the company was committed to a respectful workplace. Behind the scenes, though, the mood shifted instantly. The office felt lighter. People laughed again. Coffee breaks weren't filled with tension. Rachel came up to me one afternoon and whispered, "You did it." I shook my head. We did it. Because it was true. I may have started the file, but it was every honest voices together that brought him down. But I was done. Because while the company was scrambling to save face, I still had my lawyer. And he made it clear, this was just a toxic boss situation. This was a hostile work environment. A liability. So we filed. Quietly. Methodically. And once the company got wind of that, they bent over backwards. Settlement talks. Promises of reform. All the corporate groveling you'd expect when their image and money were on the line. And He didn't get a settlement. He didn't get severance. He got a termination letter and a reputation that would follow him forever. Weeks later, I saw him. By accident. I was leaving a coffee shop downtown, and there he was across the street. No suit. No briefcase. Just jeans and a wrinkled shirt, staring at his phone like it had betrayed him. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then I remembered every insult. Every humiliation. Every time he made me feel small. And I walked away smiling. Because revenge doesn't always look like screaming in someone's face. Sometimes it looks like silence. Documentation. Patience. And then watching them collapse under the weight of their own cruelty. The first Monday after Dan's official termination, the office felt different. I can't explain it better than this. It was like someone had opened a window in a stale, suffocating room. The air was clearer. Conversations weren't hushed anymore. People actually lingered near the coffee machine, laughing, like a team again. For years Dan had been this looming presence, the shadow in the corner. Now, he was just gone. Rachel walked past my desk that morning, smiling. A real smile, not the polite mask she used to wear. She dropped a muffin on my desk and said, "For the man who toppled the king." I chuckled, but I corrected her. He wasn't a king. Just a tyrant with a title. And she nodded. Because she knew. We all knew. A week later, I got called back into HU. Linda greeted me warmly. Not the clipped, cautious HU tone she'd used before. She actually looked relieved. "First," she said, "thank you. You and your colleagues made it possible for us to act. Without the documentation, without the consistency," she trailed off, shaking her head. "Frankly, he'd probably still be here." I shrugged. Tyrants thrive when people stay quiet. I just stopped being quiet. She leaned forward. "I know you filed through legal channels as well. I can't discuss those proceedings, but I want you to know changes are coming. Policy updates. Training. Oversight." The company heard this loud and clear. And for the first time since it joined this place, I actually believed her. Then came the lawyers. It wasn't about the money though, I won't lie, the payout was significant. It was about accountability. My attorney pushed, the company resisted, and eventually they caved. Quietly, privately. The settlement papers were thick, full of clauses and conditions. But the important part, they admitted wrongdoing. They acknowledged a hostile environment. And they promised change. That acknowledgement meant more than the check. When I signed the last page, I felt something unflint inside me. Years of tension, humiliation, bitterness, all of it finally validated. News of Dan's firing spread. Not officially, of course, companies love to hide their dirty laundry. But people talk. The corporate world is smaller than it seems. I heard whispers, he tried to land another management role, but every reference check killed it. Word had gotten around. One former coworker texted me a screenshot from LinkedIn. Dan had changed his job title to independent consultant. Corporate code for unemployable but pretending to be important. And then there was the day I saw him in person again. It was a Thursday evening. I stopped by a grocery store after work. And there he was pushing a cart, looking smaller somehow. His posture was gone, his swagger absent. He looked like a man stripped of his armor. He spotted me. Our eyes met. For a second, I thought he'd explode. But he didn't. He just looked away, jaw tight, and walked down another aisle. And that was the sweetest revenge of all. He cowled and even faced me. The weeks rolled on, and the team rebuilt itself. One afternoon, we had a lunch outing, something we never could have pulled off under Dan. We sat at a patio table, eating tacos, actually enjoying each other's company. Rachel raised her glass. To surviving Dan. We all laughed, but then she added, "And to my name, for leading the charge." I shook my head. To all of us. Dan thought fear kept us in line. But in the end, solidarity broke him. Glasses clink. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged. Now, here's the thing about revenge. People think it's about fire. Explosions. dramatic takedowns. But what I learn, real revenge is quiet, patient, precise. It's not yelling in someone's face. It's building the file. It's staying calm while they dig their own grave. It's knowing, deep down, that the moment will come, and when it does, it will be undeniable. Dan made me feel small for years. He chipped away at my confidence, my sense of worth. And yet, in the end, it was his ego that destroyed him. His arrogance. His blindness. And when I finally walked away, I realized something important. Revenge hadn't just toppled him. It had freed me. If you're listening to this, if you've got your own Dan in your life, a boss, a coworker, a so-called leader who thrives on belittling others, here's what he'll say: don't match their fire with fire. Match it with strategy. Keep records. Build allies. Stay patient. And when the time comes, let their own weight drag them down. Because the cruelest thing you can do to someone who feeds on control is show them they have none. And trust me that victory is sweeter than any insult you could ever throw back in their face.